It's been great having these speakers here, and Tom is no different than the others. These are A-plus speakers, but more than that, they're A-plus people. Every one of them, you guys have gotten to see that in our last speakers, and Tom Shefchunas is no different. I've been able to glean from him from afar for a while, and then at one of the DYMs, I found out he was from Pittsburgh. And so I kind of moved in and said, hey, I'm from Morgantown. And then, he just kind of said, oh, that's sad. And so, not at all, I made that up. It sounded good. Why ruin a good story with the truth? But no, I just got to really just talk a little bit and start up just kind of a small friendship, and then I kind of would stalk him from time to time. Of course, he would be at DYM multiple times, and we'd talk a little more. Got to be in one of his small groups during one of those, and like I said, there's so much giftedness there. There's so much a heart for Jesus, to serve people, to lead leaders. He lived in the youth ministry world for quite a while. He was we would call a big dog in the youth ministry world. He would be humble and deny that, but he was. He was one of the premier people that youth ministers around the country looked to. And God has used him mightily as an author, as content creator for Orange, as, like I said, a leader among leaders. And so he's been great. I don't want to say too much more. You can look it all up on Google. It'll be there. And just want you to just hear from him now and be blessed. So let's say welcome to Tom Shefchunas.
I don't know what it's stuck on. How's that? Yep, is it going through now? There we go. So if you do Google my name, you'll see my little sister, which is the story of my life. I was a swimmer in Franklin, Pennsylvania, near Oil City. I don't know, every time I say something about that and someone like, oh, I know that, I have a hunting cabin up there, they'll say that. But you're in Morgantown, you don't need to go all that far to have a hunting cabin. So, but my sister, we were swimmers, and I swam at Grove City College. But she was really good. She swam at Tennessee. In fact, on the wall of fame, her name's right below Peyton's, which is interesting because she was there with Peyton. So I just would always pray at every swim meet that they don't mix the events, and I'd have to actually swim against her, and people would see my little sister beat my tail. So loved it. Real quick about me, just so we have a little bit of context. This is my family. I brought some. That's my wife, Julie, and yes, I outpunted my coverage. The oldest one there on the right with the hair is Mac. He's currently a sophomore at Berry College in Georgia. He's an applied physics major and a swimmer like his dad. JoJo, my daughter. They're all boys' names, so everybody's like, tell the boys we said hello. I was like, okay, I will. So Joey looks just like me, which is clear that she makes a beautiful 18-year-old girl and a very average-looking middle-aged man. And then that's Cooper, my last one. He's about 4 years. So he's currently, that's a couple years old. He's currently a freshman in 6'1" and a wide receiver at my school. And then JoJo's a senior. So we're having great. But we met at Grove City College. She grew up in Peters Township, so we know this place well. When we drove from the airport, I was like, I got married in that church, sort of a thing as we drove by. But we're real excited. A couple other things you need to know. Obviously, I grew up in Pittsburgh, went to GCC, and I am a Steelers fan. Amen. Amen. The worst 5-3 team in the history of the world. So, are they 5-3 or 4? They're 6-3. Good gracious. I'll take it, though. You know what I mean? I'm off. I also have my AFC team or NFC team. I can't keep them all straight, but the Falcons in Atlanta. I am a Braves fan. I was a Pirates fan when Sid slid. That was brutal. And then in Atlanta, everybody talks about it. I just say I died that day. I remember that whole thing. But the other thing is I became a high school principal at the age of 27, which left me with a debilitating social condition for events like this. The Christian version of it is called angry resting face, right? And so when I'm relaxed, I look, when my face says, don't talk to me, kid, it means I'm really relaxed and would love to talk to you. So if we're hanging out later and you're going like, what is up with that guy? I'm relaxed and excited to be here. So that's really an important part of my story. One of the things I did at Grove City, which was in the summer of 90, so I got married in 97, so this must have been the summer of 94 or 95. As I said, I was a swimmer. We got in the car and we drove to Ocean City, Maryland, and tried out to be lifeguards. Anybody go to Ocean City, Maryland? Know it well? In Atlanta, we have Panama City. We call it the Redneck Riviera. Here, I said Ocean City has got some rough spots. I don't know if it's still that way, but when I was there, it's got some rough spots. I always called it the Redneck Riviera of the North with waves, because Panama City's on the, there's just no waves. And so I qualified to be a lifeguard. I actually got hypothermia during my training, so that was interesting. Anybody ever had that? Don't want to go back to that. You start to, it's just nuts. You shiver like crazy, and then you stop, and then things get dangerous. But qualified, got there, and it was a really great job. I know you're looking at me thinking, you swam? And yes, I did. My abs became an ab, and we were there. But I loved the job, and it was hard. It was really difficult, actually. It sounds glamorous, but it really was hard. Like, for instance, I had to learn a new language, a sign language. We would have 5 stands. I was at 78th, between 78th and 79th Street. The beaches down south go east to west. The beaches on the coast go north to south to north. And so I was on 78th Street, and our stands were about 200 yards apart. We had 5 of them per crew, 6 guys in the crew, and then we would rotate out, and you kind of got a day off, and you got a half a day, and that's kind of how all of that worked. But the crew chief was the only one with a radio, so you could be 400 yards away from the closest radio in an emergency situation. So this was before cell phones. I know some of us in the room look old enough to remember those days. And it was a much happier time, wasn't it? It was interesting, much more peaceful time, less vibrating in my pocket while I'm trying to speak to you. But they taught us how to do semaphore. Anybody do semaphore? Anybody in the service do semaphore? You do semaphore, so you can check my work here. Don't remember it. I was trying to work through it the other day too, but we would basically talk from a distance, and it's pretty simple. We'd always start here, and we'd wave, and the other person would go, "I see ya," and it was just A, B, C, D. Remember that? E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q. Whoever uses Q, it doesn't matter. But it was really cool because and I went from $8 an hour to $10 an hour, which in 1995 or whatever, that was a significant raise and a significant hourly salary for a punk that was just going to buy beer. Did I say that out loud? Drive up to New Jersey because they had that new iced beer up there. Anyway, that's where we did that. So I'd learn ABC, and it was kind of neat because we do it all day, every day. And so it wasn't just guys standing with the flags and spending. Like, things started to happen. Like, thanks is THANKS. And so thanks became eventually, we would just be like that. That was thanks, and it was a real quick deal. Yes is Y-E-S, and so eventually yes was just that, and then no is just that. So it was kind of funny that we would have all these shortcuts. One of the other shortcuts we always had was L-G, I think that's right, wearing red, which would be lost girl wearing red. How many of you have had a kid on the beach that got lost because they're playing in the surf? How many of you been the kid on the beach who got lost? You're playing in the surf and the curtain's pushing you north or it's pushing you south, and you're having a blast, and you come out and you look up and you go, "That's not my hotel," right? And you have no idea where you were. Well, it's one of the things we did every single day is you're watching for little kids who look confused and trying to get them. And so I'm always looking for a lost girl, or the other one was lost boy. Boy, no, boy. Wearing, blue. Or one of my favorites to get was HG, wearing red, coming your way, which was what? Hot girl, wearing red, coming your way. One of my favorites. So it was right. We actually started to repeat was this. So when you're a newbie and you're trying to learn your crew chief, it just gets frustrated with you, and you can start to see their frustration because it's repeat it. Come on, do it better. Or one of my favorites was you'd laugh, and you'd laugh like this, and so it was like quick giggle. That's funny. Or one time it was freezing out, and it was just us on the beach, and we're just talking back and forth, and I told the guy a joke. He looks at me. I mean, he's just doing this whole thing, so from 200 meters away, I can tell that he's belly laughing over this joke. It was just so fun and kind of cool to sit out on the beach and do all of that and get paid $10 an hour. And so for 2 months, I got a tan. And then in the last month, a storm rolls in, and you have 14 rescues, and you realize just how dangerous the sea can be. And if it wants something, it will take it, because that's just how it is. Now, we also learned to train. We did things like EMTs. I remember having the sea life talk, which I thought was going to be a long talk. I thought we were going to talk about sharks. And he said, by the way, here's your talk about sharks. You'll see them every day. Don't worry about them. But you got to watch for the bluefish, because the bluefish come through. Somebody's got their engagement ring on. They no longer have a finger if it flashes in the light. I remember that talk. But then Captain Schoaf, who I think he worked on the beach patrol. He was in his mid to late 70s at the time, had been on the beach patrol since he was 15 years old, and he looked exactly like you would think. He looked like a brown couch, right? His skin was just fried, and I just remember his eyes being white because he always had his sunglasses on, and he was just a full-time lifeguard. But he was training us one day, and he said, all right. He would always say, as sure as God made little green apples. He says, as sure as God made little green apples, one of you this year. One of you beans. We wore green. When you're a rookie lifeguard, you wear green. And so when we'd go swim, they'd say, look, bean soup, those sorts of things. One of you beans will go out and get a floater. And I'm a middle school boy, so I'm like, he said floater. I'm going to give you a floater. That whole thing, in your brain, you've got all these ideas and you're giggling about it. But it's true. And what a floater is, and I'm like, what is a floater? A floater is a body that somebody has passed away out in the ocean and probably sunk, and they couldn't find them. And then as the chemicals and stuff start to happen, gases expand in the body, and the body eventually pops up and floats. And he said, as sure as God made little green apples, one of you beans, and there's like 80 of us there, this year, at least one of you will have to go get a floater. And I'm like, oh, how much are you paying me an hour, sort of a thing? I need my Face ID to open up. So we practiced, and the way you practice is, you have your buddy go out into the ocean, and they basically float, and then they train you to get a towel, and you take the towel out, you swim it out, you wrap it around the body. And in the training, they're like, you wrap it around the body because if you try to grab it, often the skin will come off. I just remember going, what is happening right now, And there'll be crabs on it. I was like, my gracious, this can't be real. But as sure as God made little green apples, one of you will go out and get a floater. So I'm on the beach, watching my water. My wife still to this day will say, quit watching your water, because I will do this, and you guys will catch me doing this. I got to speak at North Point a couple of times, and my wife's like, you're watching your water, because I scan it constantly back and forth, especially in a room like this. I'm watching my water. And when I'm at the beach, she's like, relax, quit watching your water. But I'm watching my water back and forth, and I come around, and there's a middle school boy standing next to my stand, and I'm like, yeah, hey, can I help you? And he said, yeah. I've been watching out past the waves today, and I swear that there's a body floating out there. Now, this is actually something that happened several times already, because what happens is the horseshoe crabs get into the surf, they kind of pick them up and pile drive them into the ground, snaps them, and they die, and they just kind of float, and they kind of bob because of the way they float, and I've had at this point several people say, I think someone's out there. And I'd always stand on my seat and look and be like, it's a horseshoe crab, I promise. This is just how it goes. And so he says, okay, and then goes away, and I'm scanning my water for about another 15 minutes, and there he is again. He goes, I don't really know how to tell you this, but I understand the horseshoe crab thing, but I've been watching this thing, and I swear it's a body. And just about then, I see down the beach my crew chief with his flag in the air because he's got a message. And I wave it off, and he, explains, keep an eye out for an F-L-O-A-T-E-R. And then explains very quickly a surfer had gone in the night before. They often surf at night. Have you ever gone out past the breakers at night? It's kind of a freaky, awesome thing. There's a song about it. It's great, too. But they go out and they surf at night, and the board came back, and nobody found him. He was north of us, so the current was coming south, and if the calculations were correct, he'd be somewhere within 68th Street to 78th Street or somewhere in that deal. And so I look again, and I'm sure it's a hermit crab or a horseshoe crab. So I'm scanning and watching my water, and I look down, and just then there's the dad standing there, and he said, hey, I'm watching this with my son, and I know I understand the horseshoe crab thing, but I'm telling you, there is a body out there. And so I looked, and I really couldn't tell, and so I flag off to my crew chief, and I'm like, hey, there's something out there, and he's like, where? I don't know what would be where, W-H-E-R-E. And I said, it's kind of out there, probably closer to you, it's kind of out there, that moment. And he's like, go see. I'm like, you really want me to go? And he's like, go, that moment. So it's just that moment I climb down out of my stand, and I just start walking, and I'm at that point, I am swimming towards this thing. The surfer's gone in the night before. It's in the right place at the right time. I've got different folks, and I'm swimming, closer, and about halfway out, I realize I've forgotten my towel. So I just kept swimming, and I got closer and closer and closer. And just as I did, a kid on a boogie board starts streaking past me. And he takes his hand, and he comes down on top of it and picks it up. And it was a hat. I know. It's the worst story ever. It's got the greatest tension with the worst ending of all time. But I tell you the story because I want you to think for a second, and you guys have all been here. I want you to think for a second of those moments when you're standing there and you've got something important to do, and you don't necessarily want to do it. And there's something in us as men that's what we're going to do. For many of you who are veterans, you've done things way scarier than that, than I have. For many of you who are first responders, you've run into the building that's on fire, and that's a really big deal. For some of us, some of those scariest moments might be sitting down and talking to our wife and saying, hey, can I tell you something that's been going on? And we need to have a conversation. The scientists call this thing that's going on in your head metacognition, or kind of like meta-thinking, or thinking above. It's our ability as human beings, and I think it's maybe a little bit of the image of God in us. That's a non-theological, non-scientific, just chef thinking about things sort of deal. That somehow we have the ability to observe ourselves, observing ourselves, right? I can be in the middle of a conversation, and I'm here speaking right now, and in my brain, I can be having another conversation about, geez, they didn't like that story, right? doing all of that sort of stuff. And you have the ability to have that inner conversation. You've not always had it. Men, you got it around 6th grade. Girls get it around 5th grade. It's one of the reasons they get a head start on us, right? And we're catching up from there. But about 6th grade, you get this idea, and you can start having an inner conversation. You can start doing some interesting things. If you've ever had smaller kids, and you've been trying to raise them up, a lot of times we as parents make the mistake, like a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 3rd grader sticks a fork in an outlet, we say to them, "What were you thinking?" And what we're talking about is, what in the world inner conversation did you have with yourself before you stuck that fork into the outlet? And the 3rd grader says, "Well, there was a fork and there was an outlet, and I stuck it in there," right? Because they haven't thought through this. But this metacognition, this thought that's going on, these choices we make, and as men, this is really an important idea. I talked to my warrior dads last week. My warrior dads are the fathers at my school. About 50 of us get together, and we cook breakfast for each other, and we hang out, and we talk a little bit. And I told them that story, and I said, "What's the difference? Why do we go? Why do we go?" And the sheriff, that is one of the dads, said, "Muscle memory." And I said, "What?" He said, "This is why you train. This is why you train, because you have to train for an emergency, or the emergency will take over. You have to train for an emergency." I was like, "That's good." And this summer, we let the sheriff use our school building to do an active shooter training, which was great. But they went to great lengths to make it as real as possible. They used, is it called simunition? Anybody, officers, know this stuff in here? Simunition, which hurts, and it sounds like a real gunshot. Because unless you've been in it and heard that for the first time, you're not going to react well. In fact, if you talk to the sheriffs at my county, who are great, they would say that that's what happened at Uvalde. Like, these guys have all done simulations, but it wasn't realistic enough to really know. And until you get in there and feel like, I don't want to get hit by that thing, and I don't know where it is. The other thing that happens, which is great, and by the way, this is a great thing to have to offer your community, is to let the police train in your building so they know your building. It's one of the first things that the consultants told us to do. Another guy spoke up, another warrior dad spoke up, and he flies for Delta. And he said, "It's why we go to great lengths, and we have $10 million simulators that make us feel like we're flying, makes it see like we're flying, and it shakes like we're like the engines have failed, and we practice in the emergency so that we will respond well in an emergency." And we're pretty good as men about that metacognition and that conversation that's going on. But around the time you were a middle school boy, you started to have thoughts for the first time in your head. And you didn't even this was all coming online, and it's not like you wake up and you have it and you think, "Look at that," This is coming online, and you're learning about what's going on and how this thing works. But for the first time, you'll say things in your head like, "There's something wrong with me. There's something off." Or you might think, "Do I really believe in mom and dad's God? I know all the stories. I've been saved. I've even been baptized. But all of a sudden, this new system's coming online. And I'm asking myself for the very first time, do I believe in mom and dad's God?" And it's a scary place to be, and it's a lonely place to be. And maybe at that point, you went to your dad or you went to your mom and you said, "Hey, I've got some questions," like I did to my dad. And my dad his response was, because he's a dad, panic. You got to have more faith in that, right? And so then at that point, with my dad, the only thing I learned that day was my dad's not safe to get any of these questions, right? And doubts and questions don't hurt adolescent kids when it comes to faith, guys. Unprocessed doubts and questions do. So I love what James is doing here. I love last night training these small group leaders and talking about it as the safest place is a safe person, right? And the safest response is, "Thank you for asking that question. You are so brave." And in your brain, because of metacognition, you're going, "What the heck am I going to say to that," right? because you've got that ability. But it's in our brain that we do this to ourselves. It's in our brain that we start to think. And in the big things, we're pretty good. In the emergencies, we're pretty good. Let me tell you where we're not that great. When my inner conversation responds to, would you like to supersize that? Right? I'm like, heck yeah, I want to supersize that thing, right? Give me supersize it with a Diet Coke, because that'll help, right? Or when I'm on Amazon and, other people who bought this also bought that. And I'm like, well, I'm just like other people, right? And you can have that conversation and make that choice. Or it's just one more drink. It's just one more click. It's just $28 more a month to get the leather seats, right? I'll have that conversation tomorrow, not tonight. I'll surely I'm going to start tomorrow. And guess what? This is the battlefield for men, is this metacognition in our mind. It's a battlefield for everybody. But I really want to talk about it tonight, this idea of what goes on in our minds determines the direction and quality of our lives. And we're really good at the big fights, and we suck at the little ones. And it's the little ones that build on us. And it's the little ones that we've got to get better. There are tons of verses in the Bible about this. I love this. The Apostle Paul's talking to the Corinthians in 2 Corinthians. He says, "For though we live in a world, we do not wage war as the world does." Listen to that talk. That is war talk, right? That's battlefield talk. "The weapons we fight are not the weapons of the world. On the contrary, they have divine power to demolish strongholds. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God." When I read that before, until I was preparing for this, I always imagined us arguing with somebody else, right? I always imagined talking physically to somebody else, or I always imagined defending God to someone else, something like that, the godly things. But then look what he says, "And we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ." That the thing we have to take captive in this war is not someone else's, not an idea, but our own personal thoughts. Later on in Romans, he says, or was it later or earlier? When was Corinthians? I can't remember. I don't know time-wise. I could go figure it out, but I told everybody I'm not a smart man already, so we got that. So in Romans, Paul's talking, "So I find this law at work. Although I want to do good, evil is right there with me. For in my inner being, I delight in God's law." I love that, right? "But I see another law at work in me, waging war against the law in my mind and making me a prisoner of the law of sin at work within me. What a wretched man I am." The Apostle Paul, who wrote more than half of the New Testament, who we know about the church because of Paul, who came to the Gentiles. What a wretched man I am. "Who will rescue me from this body that is subject to death? Thanks be to God who delivers me through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself, in my mind, right, in my mind, a slave to God's laws, but in my sinful nature, a slave to the law of sin." That there's this battle going on inside our minds, and that's the battlefield. Now, I can relate to the Apostle Paul. I don't know about you. I fail all the time. I grew up in a legalistic church, and we could lose our salvation. And so as a 13-year-old, when sundress season came around, I was in hell again every single time. I got to be honest with you. Like, I've been doing great, and wow, boom. I had that thought, And that's an interesting thing. We were talking about the difference between sin as an action and sinful reflexes we have as fallen men, right? That's a complicated thing. A woman walks into the store, scantily clad, You may bounce your eyes and walk away and do right, but every single one of us knows exactly where she is in that store, right? Because it's just, in our minds, it's just being a man. In my small decisions, this is where I feel. In my big decisions, I'm doing great. In my small decisions, I either go to bed and think, oh, I wish I would have, or I'll do better tomorrow. Or I wake up in the morning and I do it real quick, and it's the perfectionist, legalistic mind in me that I have been fighting since I was a little kid. I could have done better yesterday, And then my perfectionist mind, Peter hits me with this. Thanks a lot, Peter. Peter tells us in 2 Peter, his divine power has given us everything we need for a godly life through our knowledge in him who called us by his own glory and his goodness. So I'm like, is it Peter or is it Paul here? Like, do I have the power to pull this off, or am I a sinful man? His divine power has given us everything we need. It's maddening to the perfectionist in me. And it's actually seemingly opposite. It's wrecked me in my faith several times because I feel like I'm not that guy. Like, God must either not be real, I'm not in the club, or he's not as powerful as he says he is. At one point in my life, I was going through a rough spell, and I was wrestling with this. Like, how could I be being used in such a cool and powerful way by God and know my heart on the inside? My counselor said, you can be both things at the same time. And I said, I don't know that. I don't know that. I was a 48-year-old man at that point. I don't know that. He goes, you can be both things at the same time. The songwriter Todd Fields, who, I don't know if you've ever met Todd, he's a great guy out of Atlanta. He's written songs you've sung, I'm sure. But Todd, when he plays worship, and Todd lives in the deep end of the pool like this, and he's thinking a lot about this all the time, and his songs reflect it. And Todd said, I'm a deeply broken man, and I am a righteous, power-packed saint. I'm a deeply broken man. That is true. I know it. I'm a righteous, power-packed saint. That is true, and I sometimes forget it. And those two things can be true at the same time. God has never used a perfect man, except for one, to do what he's doing in this world. Right? So, for you perfectionists in the room who are like, well, screwed that up. I might as well jump completely off the wagon right now, and I'll get started again tomorrow. That's how my brain always works. But I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to talk about just a few rules of thriving in the battlefield of your mind. And the first one is this, is you never fight alone. You never fight alone. You cannot be the only one in your brain. You cannot keep that last 10% to yourself. You have got to let someone in. The world, according to Shef, and only to Shef, is a deeply broken place and full of lies. Because I don't know about you, but I can figure a way around anything, right? Well, here's why I'll just do that, or I'm going to do that because she wouldn't, or, well, on a day like this, that would make total sense to go ahead and do that. In January this year, my father-in-law came to us. He's 70 years old. And we got the call to come down. We have something to tell you. He took me up into his office and he said, I'm going to divorce Kathy. It's 49. They were 3 months away from their 50th anniversary. And I'm like, you're going to what? There's no hint of this coming. I mean, they pick at each other, and sometimes they don't like each other. And Julie and I had said, hey, that's not what we want when we're 70. We still want to kind of like each other, but at this point, they had committed, and I'm going to go ahead and divorce. I just think it's the best for everybody. And then he explained to me his plan. He's got it all figured out, right? He's just going to do that. I've got the house figured out and sold. I'll give her the house. She'll have a place to be safe. I'll go ahead and move over to a little apartment. We'll be much happier this way. You guys will be much happier this way. We'll still be able to do Christmas and, Thanksgiving together, and, maybe I'll meet somebody soon. And I'm like, Kutch, my father-in-law's name is McCutcheon, and that's what my oldest Mac is named after him. And he goes by Kutch, and famous baseball player from Pittsburgh, with those things. Like, who have you run this by? He's like, nobody. I was like, Kutch, you're out of your mind. You think the world, according to Kutch, is a deeply broken place if you don't let anybody in there to help lifeguard and chaperone you that way. And it's what it takes. There's a book called People Fuel by John Townsend. It's one of my favorite books. It's super practical, and it's basically the whole plan. I can tell you the whole book. The whole book is basically, let's do an audit of my friendships and put everybody into a category and make sure I have the right sort of friends in the right places. And I can't remember all 7 of the categories, but I know it's coaches, comrades, I think colleagues, it's all C's, casuals, and then there's one that's usually family that keeps coming back over and over and over again. It's a C word. I can't remember. And then I remember the last one's caustics. And basically you do this accounting of my relationships in my life, and I think about the people around me, because, by the way, the Apostle Paul tells us we are the body of Christ to each other, right? Through the Spirit, we are the body of Christ. And I might be Christ to you tonight, and you may be Christ to me tomorrow, because we need each other, and we need to sort all of that out. You were built for this. And so he talks about coaches. And coaches, he said, coaches you pay for. And you need 2 to 3 coaches in your life. The thing that qualifies a coach is usually you pay for them. But when you meet with a coach, it's all about you. He goes, this can be an athletic trainer. This can be a dietitian that knows something that you need. This can be a counselor that you pay in order to be like, you say a few pleasantries at the beginning, and then you're like, okay, let's talk about me, right? Let's talk about this guy. And they're paid, and not under law, but their license can be revoked if they're not a safe place for you to tell the last 10%. And if you don't have coaches in your life, if you don't have 2 to 3 coaches in your life, then you've got to get to work and get a couple of coaches in your life that are going to help you get better. And then he talked about colleagues, and then comrades were in the middle. And he's like, colleagues are most of the people in your life. They're your friends. They're the people you do life with. They're you might even consider them best friends. But would you share the last 10% with that friend? And he said that's actually the difference between a comrade and a colleague, is you have to have a DTR. What's a DTR? I know? Define the relationship talk. And you sit down and go, hey, he said, test them with something. Test them, let them in on a little something, something harmless. He said they'll respond one of 3 ways. Try to solve it, and that's not a comrade. They'll change the subject, because they don't want to go down that road. That's not a comrade. Or they'll lean in and they'll ask you some questions. And then at that point, you've got comrade material. And he said you need 7 to 9 comrades. I was like, 7 to 9? He said, yeah, you need 7 to 9. He said, because the reality of relationships is you're kind of going in, and if you have 7 to 9 people you would call comrades, the reality is you probably have 3 or 4 you can call up and go, hey, I need to talk. And he recommended that. In fact, that's where he told me as a pastor, I talked about it last night, your comrades rarely will be in your church as a pastor. It's one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, because we got to pretend like there's nothing going on up here, right? We got to pretend like we've got it all figured out. And so I disagree with him on that, by the way. You can find comrades who work with you in the church, but you do have to be careful. So that's really that big idea of never fight alone. People who would come to something like this are perfect comrade material, and that's important, and that's to do. Here's the second thing is don't try, train. Don't try, train. Finish this. If at first you don't succeed, what? Try again. If at first you don't succeed, try again. I actually disagree with that statement. It doesn't work for me, right? Because I don't succeed a lot. And I try and try and try again, and guess what? I just continue to try. In fact, trying is doing nothing between now and a future event and hoping you're going to have the resources out of the blue to do it. I don't need to try. I need to do something else. For instance, how many of you made a New Year's resolution last year? Or are you just tired of it? Right? Huh? Are you still doing it? Good for you. 73% of people are still doing it after the first week. And it's like 23% of people are still doing it after the second week. And it's way less than 10% of people are holding their resolutions, so you are a great example of that. It doesn't work for me. Again, I just like to try harder. So, in Corinthians, Paul's talking to them again, and I think this is great. And he says, do you know that in a race, all the runners, but only one gets the prize? And in Corinth, they know exactly what he's talking about. They had the Isthmus Games. Here it was similar to the Olympics, giant festivals every year, and people would come from all over the place to compete in these games. So the Corinthians know exactly what he's talking about. Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Don't try, train. How many of you could run a marathon today? Anybody? Sometimes there's... If I put $100,000 on this table and said, we leave in 5 minutes, how many could run a marathon today? You got it. You can't walk. You got to do it for the $100,000. If I put $100,000 on this table and said, how many of you can run a marathon next year for this $100,000? How many would give it a shot? Just because you can't do something now because you tried doesn't mean you can't do something later, as long as you train. As long as you train. That's what the police officer said about the simunitions. That's what the Delta pilot said about that, is we train. And the hard part is, to train in an emergency situation, you have to go deep to simulate the actual situation. Here's the beauty of the small things. We can simulate that conversation with a conversation. If we can get into that last 10% and have these conversations, or ask somebody, or have the guts to go, hey, how is that going, right? We can actually train each other. And that's why you refer back to number 1 is never, never fight alone. Apostle Paul says to Timothy in 1 Timothy, as he's training a younger man, he says, have nothing to do with godless myths and old wise tales. What was going on around there is, look, there's a secret to life. Hey, look, if you just eat this stuff, it'll make your life better. Hey, look, if you just drive this type of car, back in, Corinth, things will work. It's very similar to what our world is, isn't it? Every commercial you've ever seen, right? If you use this, it's always funny to me, if you have this sort of flashlight, this beautiful woman will date you, right? Those sorts of things. They have nothing to do with each other, but somehow that's how it goes. But look what he says. He says, train yourself. Train yourself. There's the word again. To be godly. So, how do you simulate the emergency, the big emergencies? You use simulators, you use simunition, you use all that sort of stuff. How do you simulate the conversations in your mind? You get them out of your mind, and you talk them through with someone else who can give you feedback and coach you through. Third thing I want to say is admit you can't. What a men's group retreat, right? Admit you can't. You can't start with can. That's what try again is. I'll do better tomorrow, right? I'll do better tomorrow. Or I'll start tomorrow. But the reality is, you can't on your own. One of the greatest organizations in this world beyond the church is an organization called AA, and they have a 12-step process. Some of you may be very familiar with it. I'm familiar with it from my family. But they do a great job and a very thorough process of helping someone go back so they can go forward. But what do they start with? They start with this. Step 1 of the 12 steps. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol. Or we admitted we were powerless over porn. Or we admitted we were powerless over fill in the blank. And that our lives have become unmanageable. You have to start with, I can't. And you have to be humble enough to move towards, I can. And that inner conversation needs to be not a small, I'll do that tomorrow, or I'll do better tomorrow, or, well, here's why that's okay today. It needs to be more of a help. I need someone. I'm going to do something else that I've never thought I would do at a men's retreat. I'm going to read you a poem. This will be the first and last time you get read a minute, probably. But this is a book by Richard Rohr, who's a little bit controversial, and he'll mess with you. He's a very good writer. He writes really short chapters that are super dense, so it's perfect for a men's group study. And this is called Breathing Underwater, the Spirituality and the 12 Steps. So he's put together the 12 steps of AA and talked about the spirituality behind them. He would say we're all addicted to something. He would say we all put something above Jesus. He would say that might be sports for you, that might be your career, that might be alcohol, it might be porn, it might be your wife, it might be your kids. It could be something that's in between you and Jesus. And this poem has wrecked us. In my small group, I am the youngest in my small group by 10 years. And then Dennis, he's in his mid-70s. But we've read this poem together a few times, and I just think it's an interesting concept and a humbling idea. It's where the title of the book comes from. I built my house by the sea, not on the sands, mind you, not on the shifting sand, and I built it of rock, a strong house by the sea. And we got well acquainted, the sea and I. Good neighbors. Not that we spoke much. We met in silences, respectful and keeping our distance, but looking our thoughts across the fence of sand. Always the fence of sand, our barrier. Always the sand between. And then one day, I don't know how it happened, but the sea came. Without warning, without welcome even. Not sudden and swift, but sifting across the sand like wine. Less like the flow of water than the flow of blood. Slow but coming. Slow but flowing like an open wound. And I thought of flight, and I thought of drowning, and I thought of death. And while I thought, the sea crept higher till it reached my door. I knew then there was neither flight, nor death, nor drowning. That when the sea comes calling you, stop being good neighbors. When the sea comes calling you, stop being good neighbors. Well acquainted, friendly from a distance neighbors. And you give your house for a coral castle, and you learn to breathe underwater. When things stop working, or when things that we continue to try to do don't work, it's time to learn to breathe underwater. It's time to do things we never considered having to do. It's time to give up things we never considered having to give up. And we will win the battle in our minds eventually. Does that make sense? Can I pray for us, and then we'll move into a next section? Father, thank you for this group of men who come out on a Monday evening and Thank you for what they do. Thank you for the families they represent. And thank you for a church that would do something like this. And just so thankful to be here and see it and be a part of it and know that it's close to my home and that it's doing something important. Would you be with us? You promised to give us courage if we ask for it. We ask for courage. You promised to give us wisdom if we ask for it, and we ask for wisdom. We all have something we need to address, big and small. We all have emergencies, big and small. Would you help us to have the courage, and would you help us to be Jesus to each other in this time and be available? Would you help us to push when we need to push and to shut up when we need to shut up and just listen and just be great friends and be Jesus to them? We love you and we thank you. We thank you for this time and together. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen.